The camera flash exploded in Frank Romano's weathered face as another reporter shoved a microphone toward his mouth. Mr. Romano, how does it feel to be reduced to circus entertainment for Muhammad Ali? The question cut through the crowded press conference at MGM Grand like a blade, drawing snickers from the younger journalists who saw tonight's exhibition match as nothing more than a publicity stunt. Frank Iron Fist Romano stood behind the podium, his 63-year-old frame still imposing, but no longer the intimidating force that had terrorized heavyweight divisions 2 decades earlier. His calloused hands gripped the microphone stand as whispers rippled through the Las Vegas ballroom. The former heavyweight champion of the world had become a curiosity, a relic trotted out for Muhammad Ali's entertainment tour. "This is just a payday for both of you, right?" another reporter called out, his voice dripping with condescension. "Nobody expects you to actually compete with the greatest heavyweight of our time." Romano's jaw tightened. 24 years had passed since he'd lost his championship belt. 24 years since the boxing world had forgotten that Frank Romano once stood atop the heavyweight mountain. From 1952 to 1956, his name had struck fear into every contender's heart. Iron Fist Romano, the Brooklyn brawler who'd fought his way out of poverty with devastating left hooks and an iron will that never bent. Now they looked at him like a prop in Muhammad Ali's traveling show. The laughter in the room grew louder as Ali took the podium, his famous charisma filling the space instantly. "Ladies and gentlemen," Ali announced with his characteristic grin, "tomorrow night you'll see why they call him Iron Fist Romano. This man was a champion when I was still learning to spell championship." But the reporters weren't interested in respect or history. They wanted entertainment, controversy, anything that would sell papers and generate television ratings. Romano felt the familiar sting of irrelevance as the questions shifted entirely to Ali, as if the former champion had become invisible. In the back of the ballroom, Romano's wife Maria watched her husband's shoulders sag with each dismissive comment. She knew what this exhibition match meant to their family. The medical bills from Frank's recent heart surgery had drained their savings. The small Brooklyn gym they owned was losing money to newer, flashier fitness centers. At 63, Frank Romano was fighting not for glory, but for survival. As the press conference ended, Romano walked slowly to his hotel room, the echoes of laughter following him down the hallway. He sat on the edge of the bed and opened a worn leather photo album, its pages filled with yellowing newspaper clippings and boxing memorabilia from his championship years. There was the photo from Madison Square Garden, 1954, his gloves raised in victory after destroying Tommy the Tank Williams in 7 rounds. The headline read, "Romano proves he's the real deal." Another clipping showed him defending his title against challenger after challenger, his record unblemished for 4 incredible years. But time, that undefeated opponent, had eventually caught up with Frank Romano. Age had slowed his reflexes, weakened his punch, and stolen his confidence. By 1956, younger, hungrier fighters had passed him by. The loss of his championship had broken something inside him that 20 years couldn't repair. The next evening, as Romano prepared for the exhibition match, his hands trembled slightly as he wrapped them with tape. His corner man, Mickey Torino, had been with him since the beginning, and the old trainer's face showed the same mixture of pride and sadness that Romano felt. "Frank," Mickey said quietly, his Brooklyn accent thick with emotion, "you don't have to prove anything to nobody tonight. This is just an exhibition. Have some fun with it." But Romano wasn't looking for fun. Deep in his heart, beneath years of disappointment and financial struggle, a small flame of championship pride still burned. He wanted these people to remember, even for just a few minutes, what Frank Romano had once been. The walk to the ring felt like a funeral march. The crowd of 12,000 filled MGM Grand's arena, but their cheers were clearly reserved for Muhammad Ali. When Romano's name was announced, the applause was polite but hollow, the kind of recognition given to a warm-up act before the main event. Ali entered to thunderous roars, his presence commanding every eye in the arena. Even at 34, even past his absolute prime, Muhammad Ali remained the most magnetic athlete in the world. He danced around the ring with that familiar grace, acknowledging the crowd with waves and that brilliant smile that had charmed millions. As the two men met in the center of the ring for final instructions, Ali looked directly into Romano's eyes and said something that caught the former champion completely off guard. Champion, Ali said softly, using Romano's old title with genuine respect. Tonight we're going to show these people what real boxing looks like. The word champion hit Romano like a physical blow. When had anyone last called him that? When had anyone acknowledged what he'd once been, rather than what he'd become? The opening bell rang, and Romano came out with more intensity than anyone expected. His jab, though slower than in his prime, was still technically sound. His footwork, though heavier, showed the skills that had once made him feared. For the first 2 rounds, he pressed the action, landing several clean shots that drew surprised murmurs from the crowd. Ali moved with his usual grace, but something was different about his approach. He wasn't showboating or taunting as he typically did. Instead, he seemed to be studying Romano with genuine interest, responding to the older fighter's attacks with respectful defense rather than overwhelming offense. In the 3rd round, during a clinch, Ali spoke quietly enough that only Romano could hear. That left hook you just threw? That's the same one you used to drop Williams in '54, isn't it? Romano's eyes widened in shock. Not only had Muhammad Ali studied his old fights, but he remembered specific moments from battles fought when Ali was barely a teenager. The surprise nearly cost Romano his balance, but Ali steadied him with a gentle touch on the shoulder. I watched that fight on film, Ali continued during the next clinch. The way you set up that hook with the feint? Pure artistry, champion. Something began to crack inside Frank Romano's chest. For 20 years, he'd felt invisible, forgotten, reduced to a footnote in boxing history. But here was Muhammad Ali, the most famous athlete in the world, treating him not as a relic, but as a respected peer. The 4th round saw Romano fighting with renewed purpose, not for the crowd or the cameras, but for the man across from him who was showing him a kind of respect he'd almost forgotten existed. Ali continued to engage him technically, making Romano work, making him think, treating the exhibition like a masterclass between 2 professionals. In the corners between rounds, the contrast was stark. Ali's team was relaxed, treating this as the exhibition it was meant to be. But Romano's corner was electric with an energy they hadn't felt in decades. Mickey Torino wiped his fighter's face with trembling hands, recognizing something he hadn't seen since the 1950s. His champion was truly fighting again. Frank, you're moving like you did against Patterson, Mickey whispered urgently. Whatever Ali's doing to you out there, keep listening. Romano nodded, but his eyes were distant. For the first time in 20 years, he felt like a real fighter again, not just someone going through the motions for a paycheck. The crowd was beginning to sense it too. The polite applause had evolved into genuine appreciation as spectators realized they were witnessing something far more authentic than they'd expected. Ringside commentator Howard Cosell, famous for his harsh critiques, found himself speaking with unusual reverence into his microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, what we're seeing here tonight is Frank Romano showing flashes of the brilliant technical fighter he once was. Muhammad Ali isn't just sparring with an old man. He's drawing out the champion that still lives inside this 63-year-old warrior. But it was during a clinch in the 5th round that everything changed. Frank, Ali said, using his first name for the first time, why are you trying so hard tonight? This is supposed to be fun. Romano found himself answering honestly, his voice barely audible over the crowd noise. Because nobody remembers, Muhammad. Nobody remembers that I was champion. Nobody remembers that I was great. Ali's expression softened completely, and for a moment, the thousands of spectators seemed to fade away. Here were just 2 men, 2 fighters, sharing a moment of absolute truth in the middle of a boxing ring. Champion, Ali said, his voice filled with a gentleness that surprised even himself. I remember. I've studied every great heavyweight who came before me. You think I'd step in this ring with someone I didn't respect? You think Muhammad Ali would share this moment with just anybody? Romano's guard began to drop, not from fatigue, but from emotion. 20 years of feeling forgotten, of financial struggle, of watching younger fighters claim spots in boxing history while he faded into obscurity, all of it began to surface. They laugh at me now, Romano whispered, tears beginning to form in his eyes. They think I'm a joke, an old man pretending to still be relevant. Ali stopped boxing entirely. In front of 12,000 spectators and a live television audience, he placed his gloves on Romano's shoulders and looked directly into his eyes. "Frank Romano," Ali said, his voice loud enough for ringside observers to hear, "you are one of the greatest heavyweight champions who ever lived. You defended that title 13 times. 13 times! You fought the best fighters of your era and beat them all." The arena began to quiet as people realized something extraordinary was happening. This wasn't showmanship or entertainment. This was Muhammad Ali, at the height of his fame, paying genuine tribute to a forgotten champion. "You want to know what greatness is?" Ali continued, his words carrying to every corner of the arena. "Greatness is what you did to Tommy Williams. Greatness is how you came back from that broken rib against Martinez. Greatness is the way you fought through pain and doubt and fear for 4 years when the whole world was trying to knock you down." Romano could no longer hold back the tears. 20 years of suppressed emotion, 20 years of feeling like his accomplishments had been erased, 20 years of financial struggle and lost respect. All of it poured out in the middle of a Las Vegas boxing ring. The arena fell into stunned silence. 12,000 people who had come for entertainment found themselves witnessing something far more profound than any knockout could provide. In the VIP section, old-time boxing legends who had shared rings with Romano decades earlier felt their own eyes welling up with tears. They remembered the warrior he had been, the champion who had stood tall when the heavyweight division belonged to men like him. Maria Romano, watching from ringside, covered her mouth with both hands as she saw her husband finally release the pain he'd been carrying for so long. She had watched him struggle through years of being ignored, dismissed, forgotten by a sport that had once celebrated him as its king. Tonight, in front of the world, he was finally being seen again. "I just wanted them to remember," Romano sobbed, his voice breaking like a child's. "I just wanted someone to remember that Frank Romano was champion. I held that belt for 4 years. 4 years. I never ducked a fight, never took an easy opponent. I gave everything I had to this sport, and they forgot me like I never existed." His words carried across the silent arena, picked up by television microphones and broadcast into millions of homes. Viewers who had tuned in expecting a novelty act found themselves witnessing a man's soul being laid bare in the most public of settings. Without hesitation, Muhammad Ali stepped forward and embraced the crying former champion. The image would be captured by dozens of photographers and broadcast to millions of viewers. But in that moment, nothing existed except two fighters acknowledging each other's greatness. As Ali held Romano, he could feel the older man's body shaking with decades of suppressed emotion. This wasn't just about boxing anymore. This was about human dignity, about remembering that every champion was once young, hungry, and great. Ali understood that feeling, the fear that someday the world might forget what you accomplished, what you sacrificed, what you gave to become great. "You were never forgotten, champion," Ali whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Every young fighter who studies the heavyweight division learns about Frank Romano. Every trainer worth his salt knows about your 13 title defenses. Your name is written in boxing history with permanent ink." The crowd, which had come expecting entertainment, found itself witnessing something far more profound. 12,000 people rose to their feet in thunderous applause, not for a boxing match, but for a moment of pure human recognition. The applause went on for nearly 5 minutes, wave after wave of appreciation for both the forgotten champion and the current champion who had chosen to honor him. Even the hard-bitten sports writers, men who had seen every kind of boxing drama imaginable, found themselves moved by what they were witnessing. This wasn't about winning or losing. This was about what it meant to be a champion in the deepest sense of the word. "I remember, champion," Ali whispered in Romano's ear as they held each other in the center of the ring. "And now they'll all remember too." The exhibition ended there, not with a winner or loser, but with a restored sense of dignity for a man who had almost forgotten his own worth. As they walked back to their corners together, Ali raised Romano's hand high above their heads, presenting him to the crowd not as a relic, but as the champion he had always been. The aftermath of that night changed both men's lives in ways neither could have predicted. Romano returned to Brooklyn with renewed purpose, transforming his struggling gym into a training ground for young fighters who learn not just technique, but respect for the sport's history and traditions. Ali, meanwhile, had discovered something about himself that night. His greatest victory hadn't come from knocking out an opponent, but from lifting up a forgotten champion. The man who had always claimed to be the greatest realized that true greatness came not from standing alone at the top, but from helping others remember their own greatness. Frank Romano lived 15 more years after that night in Las Vegas, years filled with respect, purpose, and the knowledge that his legacy had been restored. When he died in 1991, Muhammad Ali was one of the pallbearers at his funeral, just as Romano had been honored to carry Ali during his greatest moment of vulnerability. The exhibition match that was supposed to be meaningless entertainment became one of the most meaningful fights in both men's careers. Not because of what happened between the ropes, but because of what happened between two human beings who understood that true champions lift each other up rather than tear each other down. Today, in a Brooklyn gym that bears Frank Romano's name, young fighters learn about the night when being great meant helping someone else remember their greatness. They learn that the strongest punch isn't always the one that knocks someone down, but sometimes the one that helps them stand back up.